Hey Fromley, it's Julie B. Deep Dives, and today I'm doing a special theory deep dive, part 2 of my theory on the origin of FROMville, how it connects to Tabitha and Jade, and how it all goes back to the mysterious ghoulish kids. In episode 8 of season 3, Thresholds, Victor dredged up a bombshell memory about Christopher and the boy in white that gives us new insight into the origin of FROMville and how it relates to those kids. In my video, The Origins of Tabitha and Jade, I broke down my theory that Tabitha and Jade are reincarnated. I provided all the clues that I could find in the show from season 1 through season 3, episode 6, so be sure to check that out if you haven't already. Now, after Victor's bombshell reveal regarding the origin story of FROMville in episode 8, I'm going to flesh my theory out even more and tell you how I think this whole story relates back to the sacrifice of those children, what I think may need to happen to put an end to this vicious cycle of violence once and for all, and what that means for our characters, especially Tabitha and Jade. First of all, just as a quick recap, I believe that both Tabitha and Jade have been reincarnated multiple times over for at least a few centuries, and working together will be the key to figuring out this mystery and ultimately breaking the cycle. I discussed all the clues to Tabitha's reincarnation in my previous theory video on this topic, such as Tabitha's recognition of Victor's crayon holder, and what looked like bridal lingerie in the creature's cave, which she seemed to recognize, and also Tabitha's recurring nightmares of herself in FROMville as a child wearing a very old style of clothing. And, of course, Tabitha's ability to make the same bracelet that Miranda made, among other clues. Then there's Miranda. With the assistance of acid, she was able to see many previous quote-unquote chosen ones and how they were called to FROMville but failed to save the children. I don't think it was just the drugs that were making her hallucinate. After all, Henry dropped acid with Miranda at her bottle tree in Camden at the same time and saw no visions and heard no voices. Also, it seems that her visions must have continued for quite a while after the drug trip, based on all of the art that she created. And if Tabitha is Miranda reincarnated, and both of these women were called there for the same purpose to save the children, then it stands to reason that these chosen ones who Miranda was seeing were all of her past lives. One of Miranda's paintings even depicted a woman in what appears to be Puritan clothing, and I think this could have been her original self in the origin story of FROMville in the Puritan era. Now, taking all of this into account, Jade's bizarre visions start to make a lot more sense. If you think about it, every one of the men in his visions appears to be from a different era. You have the Puritan, the Civil War soldier, this man under the boulder who could be from the early 20th century, although it's hard to tell, and of course Christopher from the 70s. So it stands to reason that these could be his own past lives. Like Miranda, Jade also had a history of powerful hallucinogenic drug use, then had one last strong drug trip before arriving in FROMville. Like Miranda, he had had visions long after his drugs were out of his system, while he's in FROMville now. But he never used acid as far as we know, so I think that's why his visions are less clear and more confusing. 3 out of 4 of his visions of these men appeared to have met grisly fates, as we can see here. And this seems to be maybe how they failed, like what Miranda saw when she was describing the chosen ones to Henry. And the 4th vision of Christopher probably met a grisly fate as well, but we just have yet to learn about his fate. And I'll get into more on his visions in a bit. One of the points that I mentioned in my last video on reincarnation just came up again in episode 8, so let's revisit that. Tabitha's maternal relationship with Victor. After Victor had spent decades blocking out memories of his childhood with his family, Tabitha was able to get him to open up in ways no one else had ever done before in season 2. With her gentle and loving support, she was able to connect with him and help him unlock the long-buried memory of his sister Eloise's existence. In season 3, episode 8, Tabitha once again emerged as a maternal figure to Victor and helped him recover a long-buried memory that should be key to bringing the central mystery of FROMville into focus. This season, Victor recalled walking in on Christopher having an argument with Jasper, a dummy that appeared to be moving and talking on its own. Victor was convinced that Jasper the dummy would then hold the key to finding out how and why everyone died in 1978 when he was a child. But after retrieving Jasper from the creature's cave, Victor couldn't get it to talk. And Henry wasn't able to help him. Neither was Sarah, who had been able to offer him support before. Henry behaves like a loving and caring father with Victor, but he had been estranged from his father during the time when he was in FROMville, so I think that's why Henry's support wasn't enough to uncover the truth about this memory of Christopher and what happened to his mother. Sarah is extremely gentle and kind with Victor, but she too was not enough. So Sarah goes to get Tabitha, who works her magic on Victor once again. Tabitha's demeanor with Victor is so motherly that it's like the show is putting her true origin, where she came from, so to speak, as the show's title says, right in our faces. In Season 2, only Tabitha was able to help Victor unlock the true memory of his mother's departure in 1978. His original memory was false, that his mother left him in the root cellar by himself that night. He realized that he had a sister whose existence he had completely blocked out, Eloise, and she was the one drawing pictures at that point, and his mother asked him to look after her, then left them both in the root cellar when she went to save the children that fateful night. But Eloise ran after their mother. His trauma and guilt over not being able to protect his sister must have been immense after this, so he blocked out her entire existence. Similarly, in Season 3, Episode 8, Tabitha is able to calm Victor down and help him realize that his memory of Christopher and Jasper is also inaccurate, covering up the true memory once again. When Victor sees Tabitha arrive, he rushes to take her hand and lead her over like a child going to his mother, saying, "You're here, you're here." He has never addressed her as Tabitha, interestingly. It's as if on some deep unconscious level, he senses his mother's soul inside her. Since Tabitha had helped him remember Eloise, he thinks that she can help him make Jasper talk, and when she can't, he goes into a tantrum and says, "It has to be you, it has to be you." Interesting wording there. Indeed, it does have to be her to unlock his memory once again. This person with his mother's soul, in my opinion. She puts her hands on his face and keeps saying things a mother would say to calm her child. "You're okay, Victor, you're okay," and asks if he wants to draw a picture. Miranda also told Eloise to keep drawing her pictures on the night when she left. After much patient effort, Tabitha helps Victor remember the truth again. He remembers that he saw Christopher and Jasper arguing in the church basement, but when they go there, Victor has a revelation. It wasn't Jasper that was talking to Christopher. It was the boy in white. Victor says the boy in white told Christopher the answers to the end are at the beginning. That it started with the children, what the others did to them, the people they loved, the people they trusted. The children were born in the dark, and then they were murdered in the dark. But someone who loved them told them a story. The story gave them hope. And when the children laid on the stones, they poured their hope into the roots that made the symbol, and then those roots became the tree. This beautiful monologue is complicated to decipher, so let's break it down piece by piece. This season, Victor has been trying to remember how and why everyone died in 1978. Now he recalls that the boy in white told Christopher that the answers to the end are at the beginning. This means that the reason why everyone was massacred in 1978, which was the end of that part of the overall story, can be found in the origin of this entire place, the event that began the entire vicious cycle of brutality and death that, based on the historical clues from Jade's visions in the show, happened at least a few centuries ago, likely around the time of the Puritans. Victor continues, saying the boy in white told Christopher that it started with the children, what the others did to them, the people they loved, the people they trusted. The children were born in the dark, and then they were murdered in the dark. What does this mean? This strongly suggests that the Ankui kids represent children who were sacrificed by their own families, who they loved and trusted, and that this horrific sacrifice began the origin story of FROMville. They were born in the dark, metaphorically, as all of us are born in the dark, innocent and without any knowledge. And then they were murdered in the dark, both figuratively and literally, murdered in the darkness of ignorance and brutality, and probably in the literal darkness of the cave below FROMville. It's unclear why their families did this to them, but perhaps they did this for some kind of reward or to get out of a desperate situation, such as starvation, perhaps impending starvation and freezing temperatures, something that was a dire threat back in the Puritan times. This theme of murder in the dark could actually point to why the monsters in FROMville come out and hunt people here only in the dark of the night. As retribution, perhaps, for what the original settlers of FROMville did to their own children. And I believe that many of the people who are brought here are the reincarnated souls of those original settlers. Others are just innocent victims who happened to be in the same vehicle as the reincarnated souls. Now Victor continues, but someone who loved them told them a story. The story gave them hope, and when the children laid on the stones, they poured their hope into the roots that made the symbol, and then those roots became the tree. Here is a reference to the sacrificial stones that we saw in Jade's vision of the Ankui kids from the Season 2 finale. As far as I can tell, there can be no other explanation for Victor's statement. These kids represent the children who were murdered by their own families on sacrificial stones. But who is the person who loved them and told them a story that gave them hope? I think it may have been the original Tabitha, from whom Tabitha is reincarnated, and Miranda before her. Perhaps she was cursed to be reincarnated over and over because she failed to stop the sacrifice from occurring, and all she could do was to tell them a story to calm them down before they were murdered. It may well be that one of her own children was one of the victims of the sacrifice too. Either way, even if this original Tabitha did not assist in the sacrifice, she would have been complicit in it by being present while this event occurred. This could explain why, in my opinion, she has been reincarnated over and over again, and this place wants to continue to punish her by claiming her children in every successive life until she makes the right choices and the cycle is broken. In Season 1, Tabitha had said that she felt like she was being punished by this place for the tragic death of her baby, Thomas. And she said it again this season. Maybe she really is being punished. Not for that, but for the sins of the father, so to speak. The original sin of her past life in the origin story of FROMville, failing to save the children. Then recall that this season, an ominous voice told Jim on a phone that shouldn't work, "They're not your children anymore." So it seems the big bad wants to claim Ethan and Julie, as I think it wanted to claim Victor and Eloise as well. But getting back to Victor's monologue, he says of the children, someone who loved them told them a story. The story gave them hope, which is a major theme of the show. Evil Ghost Abby once said to Boyd that the forest here feeds on hope, with the forest clearly representing the big bad. And this may well be true, but not just any hope. False hope. Like what that story gave to the children. False hope, because they were still murdered. The hope that this story gave to the children is similar to the hope that FROMville continually dangles in front of people, only to snatch it away again. The monsters lure them in with false hope, trying to trick people with their friendly, smiling faces. And Jasmine Monster gave false hope to Kevin, for example, a lonely person longing for companionship, to get him to open the window before she murdered him. Similarly, This person who loved the children in the origin story told them a story that gave them false hope right before they were murdered. A kind of deception, even though the intent may have been compassionate to lessen their fear. The original Tabitha, so to speak, failed to stop the sacrifice, so all she could do in the end was give them false hope before they died. Getting back to Victor's memory, he says that the children poured their hope into the roots that made the symbol, and then these roots became the tree. This could be interpreted to mean that the children were looking up at the roots of a tree above them as they lay on the stones in the cave. And as the original Tabitha's story gave them hope, false hope though it was, they focused their attention on those roots. Perhaps with their feeling of hope, they imagined daylight breaking through those roots, like a beacon to a way out of their dark fate. In Jade's Season 2 cave vision, he initially looked up and didn't see anything, any light at all coming through the roots above him and the ground. Then the stones appeared with the kids on them all around him, and he looked up again and saw the symbol, daylight, coming through the roots, forming the shape of that symbol that he had been seeing in blood from the start. In that moment, he was seeing the roots from the perspective of those children, as they had been listening to that story that gave them hope. With daylight bursting through, that hope turned the roots into a symbol. It sounds like the hope of the children before they died is what created the farway bottle tree. As Victor says, the roots became the tree. And Sarah interjects, the farway tree. It makes sense because that tree seems to be central to the mission to save the children. Miranda believed that she needed to go through that tree to save the children, and the boy in white told Christopher he needed to do that as well. But I'll come back to that later. The roots must have been the last thing those children saw before they died. And ultimately, the shape of those roots became the symbol in blood, representing the blood sacrifice of the children that has haunted Jade, Christopher, and surely everyone else who came before them in their role, or past life, in my opinion. Which leads me to this. There's a major part of the story that Victor didn't address. Who was the ringleader who led the charge for this sacrifice? I'm sorry to say this about my favorite character, but I believe that Jade, and every incarnation of him since the origin of this place, is at the center of it all, starting with the origin story of this place, unfortunately. I think the clues in this show are saying that he was instrumental as a ringleader of the sacrifice of those children. In Jade's vision of the Civil War soldier, he saw the symbol appear in tree bark coated in blood, then touched it, and we had this symbolic visual of blood on his hands. Could there be a clearer metaphor for his guilt? Not him personally, of course, but the guilt of the original Jade, from whom he has been reincarnated multiple times. Then he looked up, saw dismembered body parts hanging from the tree, and blood streamed down and soaked him all over. A clear visual metaphor for the rivers of blood that his actions as his original self triggered, the centuries of carnage. It's especially fitting that the blood poured down on him from a tree, as in his twisted family tree with his reincarnated soul. In Jade's final vision of Season 2, once again, we got another clear metaphor, an overhead shot of Jade standing in the center of a circle of sacrificial stone slabs, representing the endless cycle of violence that began with the murder of innocent children. And he's in the center of it all. It's hard to deny the imagery there, the symbolism that could represent. And above him, there was the symbol in the roots. Struggling to decipher the meaning of this vision at the start of Season 3, laying under these strings at the bar, Jade kept saying it was as if the children in that vision were trying to show him something. As he looked up at the roots from their perspective, that vision was showing him his own metaphorical roots, the origin of this place and of himself. This would also explain why Jade's visions have been so scary and violent, with these men screaming at him or attacking him. It's as if his past selves are blaming him, aka themselves, for the sacrifice of the children and the grisly fate that came to them and everyone else who's been drawn into this place. The vision of the man under the boulder screamed at Jade. The disfigured Civil War soldier chased him, shot at him, and stabbed him with the bayonet. The dummy screamed at him with the same voice as the man under the boulder. And the Puritan man with a spike through his eye choked him. There are two exceptions here among these visions. The vision of Christopher and the second vision of the Puritan man. These visions may have come from another source, perhaps the big bad. Either that, or they represent Jade's descent into madness. I say this because Christopher wasn't screaming at him or attacking him. He had a sinister smile on his face as he showed Jade his book of symbols dripping with blood. It was as if he was trying to encourage Jade to follow in his footsteps and pursue blood sacrifice. Jade had already been drawing the symbol over and over like a madman, just as Christopher did, and this vision of Christopher seemed to approve. Ethan told Jade in Season 2 that sometimes bad symbols can make you do bad things, and I think fixating on this symbol to the point of total madness helped to drive Christopher in the direction of child sacrifice. This would explain why Miranda told Victor and Eloise to hide where he couldn't find them. The second Puritan vision was much more obvious. He drank from a skull the size of a child, clearly drinking blood, of course, and held it out as if to offer some to Jade. Even though his eye had a gaping wound, he seemed perfectly fine and content with what he was doing, and encouraging Jade to do the same. Similarly, the vision of the children on the slabs may have also been encouraging Jade to consider child sacrifice, because instead of looking terrified and desperate as they did with Tabitha, they appeared and sounded excited and mesmerized. Jade and Tabitha have seen the same children, but in very different moods. By contrast, in Tabitha's visions, the kids have appeared dejected and desperate for her help, and they pawed at her like children do with their mother. The message of Tabitha's visions seemed to be save the children, while the message behind Jade's vision of them seems to be kill the children. Obviously, there aren't 7 children in FROMville to sacrifice now, but it might not have mattered how many there are in each cycle. There seem to have been 7 in the original sacrifice, but in every cycle, perhaps every iteration of Jade was driven to madness and decided to sacrifice children. It doesn't have to be 7 necessarily, and may have convinced the rest of the town to join him, or at least some of them. At that point, once any of the townspeople were broken down enough to commit child sacrifice, the lowest that humanity can sink, the big bad wiped them all out and ended the cycle, in my opinion. But getting back to Victor's new revelations about the town's history, we learned that young Victor saw the boy in white tell Christopher that to save the children, he would have to go through the tree. But he wouldn't listen, saying everything here lies. Victor says, Christopher wouldn't go to the tree, so I told my mother what the boy in white said, and that's why she left us. So that's why Miranda left her kids in the root cellar that night and intended to go through the tree. It makes sense that Victor buried this memory, because he must have felt indirectly responsible for his mother's death. But why did the boy in white tell Christopher to go through the tree and save the children? Does this mean that Christopher was the real chosen one who was supposed to save them? No, I don't think so. I believe that the boy in white told Christopher to go through the tree so that he would meet a similar fate to Dale, and essentially sacrifice himself to stop the cycle, in order to end the cycle of violence once and for all, because he was the one who led the charge to sacrifice the children in the origin story in his past life. Jade's, that is. We saw firsthand what happens when a person who is not a chosen one goes through the lighthouse bottle tree. It seems like it was only meant for the chosen ones like Miranda and Tabitha, chosen to save the children. I don't think the show would change it around now and say that Christopher was actually the chosen one rather than Miranda. Why do I think this? Because we have learned about Miranda's detailed, vivid visions through Henry, not Victor, the unreliable narrator. We saw evidence of these visions that Miranda had after doing acid. We saw her paintings of FROMville entities, places, and objects, which she created before she ever arrived there. Clearly, Miranda was the chosen one, not Christopher, in my opinion. And given all the clues that Tabitha was reincarnated from Miranda, it logically follows that all of the chosen ones who Miranda saw were her own past lives, like the Puritan woman in this painting. Jade's first vision of the man crushed under the boulder may not have been what actually happened to that man, who I think is one of Jade's past lives. It may have been trying to show Jade what needs to happen to him to end the cycle, because I think this man went through a farway tree. Victor once told Ethan that if you go through a farway tree, you could wind up stuck in a mountain somewhere. And this fate of being crushed under a boulder could be an example of going through a faraway tree and a trip through that tree gone wrong. I think the boy in white wanted Christopher to go through the lighthouse bottle tree so that something like this would happen to him, because he was already about to go mad. Now, what does saving the children even mean then? The original children, the Ankhui kids, are already deceased, clearly, and I don't think that can be changed, even with time travel confirmed on the show now. In another bombshell in episode 8, we saw time travel occur on the show, but it was closed-loop time travel, a bootstrap paradox. Julie crosses over the threshold into the dungeon ruins, and her spirit apparently undergoes astral projection of some kind. Her body is still laying in the ruins, but her spirit time travels back to the dungeon dream state from season 2, episode 1, where Martin tells her to throw the rope to Boyd while he is stuck in the well. This could even be the future, actually. We have no idea if Boyd actually was traveling to the future when he was in this state as well. There are a lot of interesting theories going around about who Martin could actually be if this is set in the future and not the past. But I'll get into that in a later video. Now, as Julie throws Boyd the rope, she doesn't change future events. No one is erased from existence due to her actions, for example. She threw the rope because she was always meant to do so. Essentially, it happened that way because it always had to happen that way, and it didn't change anything for the future. It only explained how the rope was thrown. This is the most efficient way to depict time travel, in this closed-loop bootstrap paradox, where there is no clear beginning or ending point. Again, within this model of time travel, you cannot go back in time and change future events, erase someone's existence, or save someone's life. So applying that to the sacrifice of the children, if someone were to go back in time on the show and stop that from happening, it would effectively erase countless people from existence, in my opinion, which would be really problematic. Because I believe that everyone involved in that original sacrifice, definitely the original Tabitha and the original Jade, were reincarnated, and probably a lot of others in this town now. And that means that every time they were born again into a new life, these new individuals and their families would never have existed if the original sacrifice hadn't taken place. When they were reborn, some of them had children, as Miranda and Tabitha both did. These children would also never have existed if the original sacrifice had not occurred, in my opinion, because I do believe in the reincarnation theory. It's still possible that the show could go this messy route and eradicate the existence of all of these people in the end, and FROMville itself, but I doubt it. But back to Julie in the dream state in episode 8. Next, she finds herself down in the cave suddenly and faintly hears her mother talking to Victor back when they were in the cave in season 2, episode 1. Finally, as she proceeds through the cave, she can hear the Ankhui kids nearby, sounding much more frantic than when Tabitha heard them down there. I mean, Jade, of course, when Jade heard them down there. When Tabitha was down there, there were no Ankui kids at all. Except for the one. There was one in a cage, but other than that, there were no others, and they were not yelling and cooey as Julie is hearing here. So I think that at this point, she had time jumped back to the time of the original sacrifice, long before Victor and Tabitha were ever there. Then Kenny and Acosta find Julie having a seizure as her body lays in the ruins and pull her away. If they had left her there just a little longer, she would have likely seen the original sacrifice of the children taking place. But again, I don't believe she could have stopped it from happening. She herself would cease to exist, as I think that she is the offspring of a reincarnated woman. Then what does it mean to save the children, once again, if the original sacrifice can't be changed? I think it might be an elaborate trick. The original children are deceased. The most that anyone could do within a story like this is free their souls that may be trapped here. I think Tabitha and all of her past selves have been drawn here again and again with their children because they are cursed by the original sin, if you will, of failing to stop the child sacrifice. The original Tabitha failed to save the children, but just read them a story to calm them down before the sacrifice took place. This could explain such a harsh punishment, FROMville wanting to claim her children and all of her past selves' children. Remember, the fake Thomas voice on the phone this season told Jim, "They're not your children anymore." Since events in each cycle seem to repeat, I explained in my last video on this topic of reincarnation that I think Miranda and Christopher were probably working together in that cycle to try and find answers, just like Tabitha and Jade are doing now. Victor has said that Christopher started seeing the symbol, spent more and more time alone, and then he changed. He didn't make people laugh anymore, and he became scary. He was probably seeing the same kind of confusing visions that Jade is seeing now, pushing him more and more in the direction of child sacrifice. Eventually, he snapped and decided that child sacrifice was necessary to escape. So the boy in white told him to go through the tree to save the children, but in reality, I think this would have led to his death, like it led to the death of Dale. Again, the tree was only meant for chosen ones, and I don't think that Christopher was one. So, Christopher refused and said that everything here lies. But technically, I don't think the boy in white was lying. By going through the tree and sacrificing his life, I think that would effectively save the children, the ones who were still alive, removing the threat he posed to them. We know Victor and Eloise were there, and perhaps there were even other children whom Victor has just forgotten. This was the test that Christopher needed to pass and failed, in my opinion. On the night of the 1978 massacre, Miranda failed her own test. In one of my live streams recently, my friend PM made an excellent point, and I agree. Miranda left Victor and Eloise in the root cellar and went to the farway tree to attempt to go through it, thinking there were other children to save and that would get them all home. But if she had taken her own children with her and gone through the tree with them, she may have been able to escape with them. All this time, she had thought she needed to somehow save some ghoulish kids, but it was her own children who needed saving in the end. And I'm sure the same goes for all of Miranda's previous incarnations and for Tabitha now. Miranda followed instructions that were not meant for her, but for Christopher, relayed by Victor, after the boy in white told all of this to Christopher and Victor happened to walk in on them. The instruction to go into the tree alone to save the children. That was an instruction for Christopher. I've always found it odd that Miranda chose the root cellar as the hiding place for her kids, telling them to hide there where Christopher couldn't find them. It seems like kind of an obvious place to look. But think about the nature of this place. It's called a root cellar, a reference to the roots of the magical faraway bottle tree, the roots that the Ankhui kids were looking at and poured their hope into. So this root cellar seems to be a safe harbor for children and offspring in general. On the night of the Colony House massacre, for example, the boy in white directed Julie into a farway tree that led her into the root cellar, where she was safe from the monsters. She emerged into this cabinet in the cellar, which we just found out in Season 3, Episode 8, was actually concealing a secret room behind it with a red door. Incidentally, this is the same cabinet where Jade saw this man crushed by the boulder, which implies now that certain people can safely travel through the tree to this location and others just cannot. Julie was protected, probably because she is still a child, a minor. And this place seems to be enchanted in some way, protective of children, this root cellar. It's like how Tabitha safely went through the bottle tree, but Dale got sent to the inside of the pool wall. It's the same thing with Julie versus this man. Incidentally, young Victor also survived there on the night of the total massacre of 1978. So again, it seems to have protective properties for children. Every single person in town was slaughtered, and yet somehow little Victor survived in that cellar. Just a side note on a topic that I'll discuss further in my next video, it appears that Fatima is about to give birth to an evil entity in that same root cellar. There happens to be that secret room in the location that's there for this purpose. And I think it's in this spot because this root cellar is protective of any kind of young offspring, whether it's human or not. Whatever this evil entity inside her is. As for Eloise, we don't know for sure what happened to her on the night of the massacre. She went running out after Miranda and has not been seen since, apparently, according to Victor's memory anyway. This season, Victor said she and his mother died, but he might just be assuming that Eloise died. He never said anything about what happened to her in Season 2, only that he found his mother's body. He said in Episode 8, interestingly, that Eloise was always so good at hiding when they played hide and seek, and he was never able to find her. Perhaps she found some other enchanted place that offered her protection and is still living deep in the woods somewhere as a loner adult. Or maybe we'll find out that she did lose her life back then and was reincarnated, maybe even as someone we already know. Tony Teflon has an interesting theory that Sarah is Eloise reincarnated. Now, granted, there's a giant age gap, but maybe she was reincarnated as Sarah much later after her demise. Anyway, even though Miranda left her children in what I think is a magically protective location, she still failed her test. She should have taken them with her and gone through the faraway tree, in my opinion. The specific cause of the total massacre that ensued after is still unclear, but I theorize that it was triggered by the failure of Miranda to save her own children by taking them through the tree with her, as well as the failure of Christopher to go through the tree and thereby sacrifice his life. If they had both succeeded in their missions, I think this entire cycle may have stopped then. Now the huge question we're left with is this. What can Tabitha and Jade do to break this cycle? First of all, I would say that Tabitha needs to save her own children. Perhaps the answer was not to go through the bottle tree alone, but to take her kids with her. Ever since Tabitha got back, she feels that she failed to complete her mission. She's still fixated on how to save the Ankhui kids who are already deceased. Since she went through the bottle tree alone, I think the boy in white sent her to find Henry so that she could gain insight into Miranda and her past lives, which would actually be helpful. I've come around to the way of thinking that he is trying to help how he can, but he's limited in what he's able to do. Tabitha thought the answer lay somewhere within the paintings in Miranda's basement and spent a whole night studying them. But the answer wasn't in any particular painting at all, as far as I'm concerned. The answer was in the sum total of what the paintings represent and the meaning of Miranda's visions of the chosen ones, that they are Tabitha's past lives. Now Tabitha is back, but she still has time to figure it all out before it's too late. And what about Jade? In the end, he may need to sacrifice his own life to break the cycle. I don't think this would happen anytime soon, of course. This would be something that would happen in the series finale. And if he does have to sacrifice his own life, this might be why a couple of the visions he's seen have tried to attack him. When the Civil War soldier chased him, shot at him, and tried to stab him with the bayonet, I believe that was a vision of a past self who may have been trying to communicate that he needs to take himself out in the end. The same goes for the Puritan man choking him. It was essentially him trying to unalive himself. But these visions don't have the power to actually hurt him. It's more of a message, I think, trying to show him that he needs to sacrifice himself in the end. And so far, he's never actually been physically hurt or complained of having any kind of residual effects from these attacks. And this very first vision was what may actually need to happen. He may need to go through the bottle tree and sacrifice himself, winding up in a state such as this. Now you might ask, what is the boy in white's role in all of this? Has he been trying to help or not? Is he good or evil? He is one of the most mysterious aspects of this show. I'll dedicate a future video to examining him more. In short, I now believe he's not evil. He's not purely good either, but more of an ambiguously good figure, an entity that helps people when it can, but there are limits to what he can do, and sometimes he has to do unpleasant things, but the ends justify the means, and it serves the greater good of the larger number of people. Think of the trolley problem that comes up in this show so many times, the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few or the one. Like telling Christopher to go into the tree to save the children. Actually, I think the boy in white wasn't technically lying to him. He just wasn't telling him the whole truth either. He was deliberately misleading Christopher, in my opinion. I think the boy in white knew that the tree would not literally take Christopher to save any kids, but that it would lead to his demise, because that tree was only meant for chosen ones in Miranda's role. But for the boy in white, again, the ends justify the means. This would have protected the children in town who were still a threat, who were still threatened by him, and I think it would have helped to end this entire vicious cycle. Now, going back to the very beginning, there were already clues that make sense looking back on them now about what's really at the root of this show, what's really at the origin of it. At the start of the very first episode, the show gave us a huge clue as to what the root of all of this is. It showed us the demise of little Megan and displayed her body in gruesome detail, a shocking moment that hooked viewers in with amazement at the fearlessness of this show. Although this happened before the two cars arrived in season 1 and the new cycle began, showing us Megan's death thereby proved to us how dark this place really is, that the murder of children is at the origin of it all. And in season 1, episode 3, when Boyd manhandled Jade at the choosing ceremony, and he still thought this was all an elaborate escape room, Jade said this interesting quote, "I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to ruin all of you." In that moment, although he didn't realize it at the time, I think Jade was speaking the truth. If he doesn't sacrifice himself in the end, or somehow find another loophole to break this cycle, he will indeed ruin all of them. He will trigger another total massacre, along with Tabitha, if they don't figure out their origins, complete their missions, and break the cycle of carnage that has claimed so many lives, likely for hundreds of years. I believe that Tabitha's soul, Jade's soul, and likely many others' souls in FROMville were cursed to be reincarnated again and again until they can figure out how to stop this vicious cycle from repeating yet again. So I know that was a lot to absorb, But the bottom line is, everything goes back to the children on this show. The sacrifice of the children was the origin of this place and all the cycles that have occurred. And Jade and Tabitha are the key to either keeping the cycle going or breaking the cycle once and for all. That much I'm certain of. Now, I want to know what you think. What do you think about Victor's bombshell unearthed memory regarding Christopher, the boy in white, and the children? What are your theories about the origin of FROMville and how the cycle could be broken, if it can be broken? Could Jade, Tabitha, and perhaps others have been reincarnated? Or do you think they're just filling the same roles as the people who came before? Another popular theory. Maybe from cursed bloodlines. Let me know your thoughts on Victor's bombshell memory down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, keep on deep diving and let's see what we can uncover together.